It was a warm summer evening in Georgia, and the sun had just dipped below the horizon. The sky still carried a faint orange glow, and the air was thick with the smell of pine and freshly cut grass. Angela Brooks, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher, had just finished grading her students' assignments at the library and was heading home. She loved her job, but the long day had left her exhausted. Her little silver sedan hummed softly as she drove along the quiet back roads. Angela preferred these routes. They were peaceful, surrounded by tall trees and open fields, far away from the constant noise of the city. Her favorite gospel playlist was playing through the speakers, and for a moment, she felt completely at ease. But that peace didn't last long. As she turned down Willow Creek Road, a narrow stretch lined with towering oaks, she noticed headlights flashing in her rearview mirror. At first, she thought it was just another driver heading home late, but then the blue and red lights came on. Angela's heart skipped a beat. She eased her car to the side of the road and parked. Her hands instinctively tightened around the steering wheel as she took a deep breath. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run any lights. She couldn't think of a single reason why she would be pulled over. Alright, slightly smiling face. I'll now expand part 4 into a 1,300-word immersive narrative in simple, smooth, and suspenseful English. I'll make it highly engaging so the audience stays hooked from start to finish. The turning point of the story will unfold here, but I'll avoid any inappropriate or violent content while keeping Angela sat frozen in her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned pale. The night was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that carried weight, like the air was holding its breath. Across the road, the wild boar still stood, its heavy breathing mixing with the faint hum of summer insects. Its sharp ears twitched at every sound, its small dark eyes watching Cole carefully. Officer Cole didn't move. His stance was steady, his breathing controlled, and his focus locked entirely on the animal in front of him. The hooked pole remained lowered at his side, but Angela could sense from his posture that he was ready to act if needed. Angela wanted to speak, to ask him what was happening, but her voice wouldn't come. Instead, she sat completely still, her heart pounding hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. Then, something unexpected happened. The boar lowered its head, gave one last sharp snort, and suddenly backed away. Step by step, it turned toward the woods, pausing for only a moment before disappearing silently into the darkness. Angela blinked, hardly believing what she'd just seen. One moment, the animal had been restless and tense, and now, it was gone. Cole didn't move right away. He waited for a few seconds, his eyes fixed on the spot where the boar had disappeared. Only when the rustling of leaves faded completely did he finally lower the pole and let out a quiet breath. Angela slowly rolled down her window. Is it gone?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Cole turned slightly, giving her a short nod. "Yeah," he said. "It's gone." Relief washed over Angela, but it didn't last long. Something about Cole's calmness still unsettled her. It wasn't just the animal, it was everything about tonight. She hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Officer, did you know there were wild animals around here?" Cole glanced at her briefly, then back toward the woods. "I've heard reports," he said simply. "These roads are close to their territory. They come out at night more often than people realize." Angela frowned slightly. "But, the way you handled it? You seemed like you knew exactly what to do." Cole paused for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Let's just say I've dealt with situations like this before," he said calmly, his voice giving away nothing more. Angela nodded slowly, though her unease lingered. She didn't know whether to feel reassured or more concerned. For a few moments, silence settled between them again. The night seemed calmer now, almost peaceful compared to the tension of the past few minutes. The gentle breeze rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth. Cole finally stepped closer to her car window, his voice low but firm. "Listen, it's not safe to stay out here any longer," he said. "Why don't you head straight home? Stick to the main roads from now on." Angela nodded quickly. "Yes. I think that's a good idea." She started her car, the soft hum of the engine breaking the silence around them. As she glanced at Cole one last time, she noticed that his calm expression hadn't changed. It was almost as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Angela hesitated, then asked one last question. "Officer, do wild animals usually get this close to the road?" Cole looked at her for a long moment before replying. "Sometimes," he said simply. "But tonight, you were lucky." There was something in the way he said it that made Angela pause. She wanted to ask more, but she decided against it. Instead, she nodded politely and shifted her car into gear. As she drove away, the quiet road stretched endlessly ahead of her. The moonlight spilled gently over the pavement, and the soft glow of her headlights cut through the shadows. She glanced at her rearview mirror once, catching a glimpse of Cole standing by his patrol car, watching the tree line. For the first time all night, Angela allowed herself to breathe deeply. The weight in her chest eased slightly as she merged onto the wider highway, leaving the dark back roads behind. But even as the distance grew between her and Willow Creek Road, her thoughts remained tangled. Something about the whole encounter didn't feel random. Cole's calmness. The boar's sudden appearance. The strange device she had seen on his belt earlier. It was as if there were pieces to a puzzle she couldn't quite put together. By the time Angela reached her neighborhood, the quiet streets lined with small houses and glowing porch lights felt comforting. She parked in her driveway and sat for a moment, letting the soft hum of the engine soothe her frayed nerves. Inside her home, the familiar scent of lavender candles and freshly cleaned floors surrounded her, bringing a small sense of peace. She locked the door, set her bag down, and leaned against the wall, finally letting out the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But her mind wouldn't rest. Angela pulled out her phone and checked the news, curious to see if there had been any reports about wild animals in the area. There were a few mentions of sightings from the past month, but nothing like what she had just experienced. Then, as she scrolled through local community posts, she noticed something interesting. Several people had complained about strange activity near Willow Creek Road. Some mentioned hearing loud noises at night, others claimed to have seen patrol cars parked there without explanation. Angela frowned, her curiosity deepening. She thought back to Cole, his calm demeanor, and how prepared he had seemed. It was almost as if he had known something like this might happen. But why? Angela shook her head, deciding not to dwell on it for now. She needed rest. Later that night, as she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her thoughts replaying the entire evening over and over. The flashing lights in her rearview mirror. The strange questions. The heavy silence. And that moment when the boar turned, ready to charge. Each memory came back vividly, her body tensing slightly with every detail. But amid the confusion and unanswered questions, one thing became clear to Angela: she had been lucky. Lucky that she had stayed calm. Lucky that she had followed her instincts. Lucky that the night had ended without harm. She closed her eyes, trying to let the tension slip away, telling herself she was safe now. The soft hum of her bedroom fan filled the quiet, soothing her nerves as she drifted toward sleep. Still, deep in the back of her mind, one lingering thought refused to fade: there was more to that night than she understood. And she knew, somehow, that one day, she would find out the full story. The tension natural and cinematic. Here's part 4 fully expanded. Angela sat frozen inside her car, her breathing shallow as she watched the wild boar inch closer to the road. Its heavy steps crunched softly against the gravel, and its deep grunts echoed through the silent night. The distant chirping of crickets had faded, replaced by the steady thud of her heartbeat in her ears. Her eyes darted toward Officer Cole, who stood a few feet away, holding the long pole with the hooked end in his hand. He wasn't panicking. He wasn't even moving much. He seemed oddly calm, as though he had been expecting this moment. That unsettled Angela even more. She whispered to herself, "Stay calm, Angie, stay calm." Cole slowly took a few steps closer to the patrol car, his body angled toward the Boar. He glanced briefly at Angela and gave her a slight nod, as if signaling her to stay still. The Boar snorted loudly, its small, sharp eyes glinting faintly under the moonlight. It seemed restless, pawing at the dirt with one hoof as if deciding whether to move forward or retreat. Angela's palms were damp against the steering wheel. Her entire body was tense, ready to react at the slightest movement, but she forced herself not to make a sound. Then, the Boar suddenly stopped. Its ears twitched, its head tilted slightly, and for a brief moment, it locked eyes with Cole. Angela noticed something strange. The officer didn't back away or show fear. Instead, his grip tightened slightly on the pole, and his stance shifted, as though he was prepared for whatever came next. The animal took a step forward, its powerful body swaying slightly with each movement. Cole remained still, his calmness contrasting sharply with Angela's growing panic. Suddenly, Angela noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small device clipped to Cole's belt, the same one she had seen earlier when he was near his patrol car. She remembered the way he had adjusted it before the Boar appeared, and her unease deepened. Was this a coincidence? Her thoughts raced, but before she could process them fully, the Boar made a sudden, sharp grunt and stomped both front hooves against the ground, kicking up dust. The sound was deep and startling, and Angela flinched instinctively. Cole raised one hand slightly, palm outward, signaling her again to stay still. The tension in the air grew heavier, as though the night itself was waiting for something to happen. Angela's eyes locked on the animal, her mind racing through everything she'd ever heard about wild boars. She knew they could be unpredictable, especially at night. She also knew that making sudden movements or loud noises could provoke them. The Boar shifted its weight, lowering its head slightly. It seemed to be testing the ground, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Angela swallowed hard, her throat dry, her body trembling with quiet anticipation. Then, unexpectedly, the animal turned its head not toward Cole, but toward Angela's car. Its small eyes glinted faintly, and it took a cautious step in her direction. Angela's breath caught in her chest. She dared not move. Cole reacted quickly. He stepped between Angela's car and the animal, holding the hooked pole low but steady. "Stay inside," he said in a calm, controlled voice. Angela nodded even though she couldn't find her voice to respond. The Boar stopped, tilting its head slightly, as though studying Cole's movements. The silence was almost unbearable now, broken only by the faint hum of insects and the distant rustle of leaves in the warm summer breeze. Then, the animal made a surprising choice. It backed away, not much, just a few steps, but enough to change the energy in the air. Angela almost felt a wave of relief wash over her, until she noticed Cole's expression. He didn't look relieved at all. His jaw tightened slightly, his eyes focused sharply on the Boar, almost as if he knew this wasn't over. Angela frowned slightly, confused. Then, it happened. The Boar suddenly swung around and charged not toward Angela's car, but directly toward Cole. Angela gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she pressed herself back against the seat. Everything seemed to slow down for a moment, the pounding of her heart, the dust swirling up from the gravel, the sound of the animal's heavy hooves striking the ground. But Cole didn't panic. He shifted quickly, planting his feet firmly and holding the pole out in front of him. The hooked end caught the ground slightly, anchoring him as he sidestepped smoothly. The Boar skidded to a halt, snorting and pawing the earth again, clearly frustrated. It had missed its target, and now its breathing grew louder, heavier, almost echoing in the quiet night. Angela's chest rose and fell rapidly as she tried to process what she was seeing. Cole took a slow, deliberate step backward, keeping his eyes locked on the animal. His body language remained calm, controlled, almost methodical. For a moment, everything stood still: the officer, the animal, and Angela, who sat frozen inside her car, watching every detail unfold. Then the boar charged again. This time, Cole stepped to the side more quickly, using the hooked pole to guide its movement slightly away from the vehicles. The animal darted past him, its powerful hooves pounding against the gravel shoulder before it turned sharply back toward the road. Angela's fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale. She wanted to leave, to drive away from this entire situation, but she couldn't. She didn't want to risk startling the animal or distracting Cole. The tension was almost unbearable now. Every second stretched into what felt like minutes. Cole finally spoke without turning to look at her. "Stay calm," he said firmly. "Don't move. Just, let me handle this." Angela nodded even though he couldn't see her. Her breathing was uneven, and she pressed her back against the seat, wishing the night would end already. The boar circled back again, grunting loudly, clearly agitated. Its sharp tusks gleamed faintly under the thin moonlight, and its heavy breathing filled the quiet road. Angela glanced toward the trees, wondering if there were more of them nearby. The thought alone sent a chill down her spine. Cole, however, seemed entirely focused on this one animal. His stance shifted slightly, his grip on the pole tightening as he watched every subtle movement it made. The air between them was thick with tension, as though the night itself had narrowed down to this single moment. Angela could feel it deep in her gut: something was about to change. And then, everything happened at once. The boar made a sudden sharp turn, kicking up dust and small stones, and lunged again, but this time, its movements were faster, less predictable. Cole braced himself, stepping forward instead of backward, and the two came dangerously close. Angela's breath caught as her eyes widened in shock. She instinctively reached for her phone again, forgetting there was no signal here, and lowered it slowly when she realized calling for help wouldn't work. All she could do was watch. The boar stopped just short of Cole this time, its hooves digging deep into the dirt, as though challenging him. It let out a loud, guttural snort, lowering its head slightly as if preparing for another move. Cole held his ground, calm but alert, his entire body ready to react. Angela realized something then: the officer wasn't just dealing with an unpredictable animal. He seemed to understand it, almost like he'd encountered situations like this before. But why here? Why now? Her thoughts spun in circles, but there was no time for answers. The warm summer night was still, but the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was charged with energy, thick with suspense, and full of unspoken questions. Angela didn't know what was going to happen next. All she knew was that something about this night was far from ordinary, and whatever came next would change everything. Through her side mirror, she saw the patrol car roll to a stop behind her. Angela sat quietly in her car, her hands resting on the steering wheel, waiting for Officer Cole to return. The crickets outside chirped in a steady rhythm, and the occasional rustling of leaves filled the silence. The road was empty, covered in shadows from the tall oak trees that lined both sides. Her heart was still beating faster than normal. She kept telling herself this was just a R. Angela sat in her car, her hands still resting on the steering wheel, trying to keep her breathing steady. The road was quiet, but the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It was heavy, almost as if the night itself was holding its breath. The soft hum of insects and the distant croaks from the creek now sounded faint compared to the pounding of her own heartbeat. Through the windshield, she glanced at Officer Cole. He was standing near the rear of his patrol car, his back to her, adjusting something she couldn't quite see. His movements were deliberate and unhurried, as though he was preparing for something. Angela's instincts whispered that something wasn't right. She thought about leaving, about simply starting her car and driving away, but she stopped herself. Running wasn't an option. Not yet. Not when she didn't understand what was happening. Her eyes shifted toward the woods. The faint rustling she had heard earlier was gone now, replaced by an eerie stillness. The trees stood like silent shadows under the dim silver light of the moon. Suddenly, there was another sound, a low, deep grunt from somewhere within the dense trees. It was faint but close enough for Angela to hear clearly this time. Her chest tightened, and she leaned forward, peering through the glass, trying to catch any movement in the darkness. She looked at Cole. He turned his head slightly, his eyes fixed on the tree line too, as though he had heard it as well. "Stay in the car," he called out firmly, his voice carrying across the quiet road. Angela nodded quickly, gripping the steering wheel tighter, though she felt far from safe inside the locked vehicle. The rustling started again, louder now, followed by the snapping of small branches. Something was moving, and it wasn't small. Angela's breathing grew shallow as her imagination began to fill in the blanks. Then, she saw it. A dark, bulky shape emerged slowly from the edge of the woods. It paused for a moment, its large frame blending almost perfectly with the shadows. The faint moonlight revealed coarse, bristled hair and a powerful body moving with slow, deliberate steps. Angela's breath caught in her throat. It was a wild boar. Cole stood straighter, his hand resting on his belt as he watched the animal closely. The boar grunted again, its small dark eyes glinting faintly in the dim light. It sniffed the ground, pawed at the dirt, and took a few cautious steps forward, edging closer to the road. Angela couldn't take her eyes off it. She had read about wild boars before, how unpredictable they could be, how strong and stubborn they were. But she had never seen one up close, and certainly not in the middle of a lonely road at night. Cole didn't move. He stood perfectly still, almost as though he was waiting for something. His calmness didn't ease Angela's nerves, it made them worse. The boar lifted its head suddenly, its ears twitching as if sensing the tension in the air. It made a sharp snorting sound, scraping its hoof against the ground. Angela's heart raced faster. She kept reminding herself to breathe, but her body felt frozen in place. Cole finally spoke, his voice steady and low. "Stay very still," he said without looking at her. Angela nodded instinctively, even though he couldn't see her from where he stood. The animal hesitated, then began moving along the side of the road, circling slightly, as though deciding whether to approach. Its deep, guttural grunts echoed softly, mixing with the hum of the summer night. Angela's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Her pulse was so loud in her ears that she barely noticed the faint sound of Cole clicking something on his belt. A strange thought crossed her mind: he didn't seem surprised to see the animal here. If anything, he seemed prepared. Her instincts sharpened at that realization. Cole slowly stepped toward his patrol car, keeping his eyes locked on the boar. He opened the rear door carefully and reached inside, pulling something out, a long, sturdy pole with a hooked end. He held it loosely at his side, his movements deliberate and controlled. Angela frowned, confused. Why would a police officer carry something like that? Her question didn't linger long because the boar suddenly stomped its front hooves against the dirt, making a loud snorting sound. Angela flinched, her body tensing as adrenaline surged through her veins. Cole remained calm, almost unnervingly so. He stepped slightly to the side, angling his body in a way that seemed almost intentional, like he was trying to direct the animal's focus somewhere else. The boar grunted again and began edging closer to the road. Its small eyes darted between Cole and Angela's car, as though deciding where to go. Angela's breathing grew uneven. She lowered her window just a crack and whispered, "Officer, maybe we should get back in the cars." Cole glanced at her briefly, his expression unreadable. "Just stay where you are," he said firmly, his voice steady. She nodded, though her body screamed at her to move. Then the animal made another deep, throaty sound and stepped fully onto the gravel shoulder, its hooves crunching softly under its weight. It was closer now, close enough for Angela to see its sharp tusks catching the faint moonlight. Every instinct in her told her this was dangerous, but something about Cole's stillness bothered her. He didn't look surprised, and he didn't look scared. In fact, Angela realized, he looked ready. Cole took one more step forward, the hooked pole now resting casually in his hand. He glanced briefly at Angela, his voice low and calm. "Don't make any sudden movements," he said. Angela's mind raced. She forced herself to stay still, but her fingers trembled slightly against the steering wheel. The boar pawed at the ground again, huffing loudly, as though warning them. Cole slowly raised his free hand, as if signaling something. Angela watched carefully, her eyes darting between the officer and the animal, her unease growing with every passing second. Then, something shifted. The boar's body tensed, its ears twitching sharply as if it had sensed something invisible in the air. It lowered its head slightly, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed aggressively. Angela's stomach tightened. She didn't know what Cole was planning, but she could feel that whatever was coming next would change everything about this strange, quiet night. The woods around them seemed to hold their breath, as though the entire world was waiting. Angela had no idea if she was in danger from the animal, or from something else entirely. Out and stop, that it would be over soon. But deep down, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing inside her. A few minutes later, Officer Cole returned, his boots crunching against the gravel. His flashlight was now off, but his serious expression remained the same. He stopped next to her window, resting one hand casually on the roof of her car. "Step out of the vehicle for a moment," he said firmly. Angela hesitated. She looked up at him, trying to understand why this was necessary. Is there a problem, officer?" she asked gently, her voice steady but cautious. Cole nodded once, though his tone stayed neutral. "Just need to ask you a few questions away from the car," he replied. Angela took a slow breath and opened the door. The warm summer air wrapped around her as she stepped onto the gravel shoulder. She smoothed the front of her blouse and stood still, waiting for his instructions. He gestured for her to follow him a few steps away from her vehicle, closer to the edge of the road where the tall grass began. The night was still, and the only light came from his patrol car and the soft silver glow of the moon overhead. "Where exactly are you coming from tonight?" Cole asked, his tone calm but probing. "The library," Angela replied softly. "I stayed late grading some of my students' papers." He nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "And you said you live on Pine Ridge Avenue, right?" "Yes, that's correct." There was a pause. Cole's expression didn't change, but Angela could sense he was studying her carefully, almost as though he was trying to catch her in a lie. She shifted her weight slightly, uncomfortable under his gaze but determined to remain composed. "Do you take this road often?" he asked after a moment. "Sometimes," Angela said. "It's usually quicker than the main highway." Cole glanced briefly toward the woods on the opposite side of the road, where shadows stretched deep and silent between the trees. "Not many people like driving through here at night," he said, almost as if speaking to himself. Angela offered a small, polite smile. "I guess I've never had a reason to worry." Cole didn't respond right away. Instead, he pulled a small notepad from his pocket and jotted something down, his eyes occasionally lifting to meet hers. Then, without warning, he walked back toward his vehicle. Angela stood by her car, watching him carefully. Her unease was growing with every passing second. She glanced around, hoping to see another car, another person, anyone who might make the situation feel less isolating, but there was nothing. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, silent and empty. After a few moments, Cole returned once again, holding something small in his hand. Angela noticed it was a tiny remote-like device. He clipped it to his belt casually as he approached her. "You should know," he said evenly, This area isn't the safest at night. There've been reports of wild animals around here lately. Angela's brows lifted slightly in surprise. Wild animals? He nodded. Boars, mostly. They come out after dark, looking for food. She glanced toward the dense trees on the other side of the road. The thought of wild animals nearby sent a chill down her spine. She hadn't heard any noises from the woods, but the idea of something lurking unseen made her shift uneasily on her feet. Cole seemed to notice her reaction, and his expression softened ever so slightly. "Don't worry," he said. "Just stay alert. These roads can be unpredictable." Angela nodded slowly, unsure if his words were meant to comfort her or unsettle her further. The silence stretched again, thick and tense. Angela could hear the faint hum of insects, the distant croak of a frog near the creek, and the occasional whisper of wind through the leaves. Every little sound felt louder now, amplified by the stillness around them. Cole finally spoke again, his voice steady and low. "You know," he said, "people tend to underestimate how dangerous these back roads can be at night." Angela looked at him carefully, trying to read his expression. "I guess I've been lucky so far," she replied softly. "Luck only lasts so long," he said, almost as though he were speaking more to himself than to her. The way he said it made Angela's chest tighten slightly. She couldn't tell if he was warning her about something or simply making conversation, but there was a weight to his tone that made her uneasy. Cole stepped back slightly and glanced toward her car. "Why don't you wait inside your vehicle for a moment?" he suggested. "I need to check something in my truck." Angela hesitated but nodded politely. She returned to her car, closed the door, and locked it. Inside, she sat quietly, watching through the side mirror as Cole walked back to his patrol car. She saw him open the rear compartment briefly, though from her angle, she couldn't see what he was doing. He seemed to move deliberately, almost cautiously, before shutting the door and adjusting something near the back of his vehicle. Angela frowned slightly, her curiosity growing. What exactly was he checking? Her thoughts were interrupted when she noticed a faint rustling sound coming from the woods nearby. At first, she thought it was just the wind, but the noise grew louder, like something large moving through the underbrush. Her pulse quickened. She leaned forward slightly, trying to see through the darkness, but the dense trees made it impossible. Her imagination began racing, replaying Cole's earlier warning about wild animals. She reached instinctively for her phone, forgetting there was no signal here. She sighed softly, setting it back down on the seat beside her, and kept her eyes on the shadows near the woods. A few seconds later, Cole returned to her window. His face remained calm, but there was a slight glint in his eyes, as though he knew something she didn't. "Everything okay?" Angela asked cautiously. He nodded once, though he didn't explain what he had been doing. "Just making sure things are under control," he said simply. Angela studied him for a moment, her unease deepening. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident, deliberate, almost too composed, that made her wonder what exactly was happening here. The silence between them lingered, stretching longer than before. The soft hum of night creatures filled the air, but beneath it, Angela thought she could hear something else, a distant, low grunt from the woods. She turned her head slightly, her eyes scanning the tree line. "Did you hear that?" she asked softly. Cole paused, glancing toward the woods as well. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I heard it." The air seemed to grow heavier, the warm summer night suddenly feeling thick with tension. Angela's fingers tightened around the steering wheel, her body alert to every sound around her. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the trees, something was moving. Angela didn't know what it was. She didn't know why Cole seemed so calm about it. But deep down, she felt it, something was about to happen. A tall figure stepped out, adjusting his belt and cap. It was Officer Darren Cole, a name Angela had heard before but never met in person. In her community, People often whispered about him. Some said he had a reputation for being strict and short-tempered during stops, especially when it came to people who didn't look like they belonged in certain areas. Angela swallowed hard. She rolled down her window halfway and switched off her radio, the soft music fading into silence. The warm breeze carried the faint sound of crickets and distant frogs from a nearby creek. She could hear her own heartbeat in the stillness. Within moments, Officer Cole approached, his boots crunching against the gravel shoulder. His flashlight beamed directly into her car, momentarily blinding her. "Evening, ma'am," he said flatly, his tone giving away nothing. "Good evening, officer," Angela replied politely, forcing a small smile. "Is there a problem?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked over her car carefully, as if inspecting every detail, before shifting his gaze back to her. "License and registration," he said, holding out his hand. Angela nodded, her hands moving slowly and deliberately. She remembered all the safety tips her father had drilled into her years ago about staying calm and respectful during traffic stops. She retrieved her documents from the glove compartment and handed them to him carefully. While Cole took her information back to his car, Angela sat still, her fingers nervously tapping the steering wheel. The night around her seemed to grow quieter, as if the whole forest was holding its breath. She tried to calm herself, telling herself that maybe it was just a routine stop, nothing more. After what felt like an eternity, he returned, his expression unreadable. "Where are you headed tonight?" he asked, shining his flashlight toward the passenger seat. "Just heading home, officer," Angela replied softly. "I live over on Pine Ridge Avenue." Cole stared at her for a moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though he were studying her face. "You come through this road often?" he asked. Angela hesitated, unsure why he was asking. "Sometimes," she said cautiously. "It's just a shortcut from the library." He nodded slowly, then glanced toward the woods on the other side of the road. The silence between them stretched longer than it should have, and Angela felt a ripple of unease run down her spine. Cole finally stepped back a little and rested one hand on his belt. "Stay right here," he said, before turning toward his vehicle again. Angela watched him walk away, her chest tightening with an unshakable sense of discomfort. She couldn't explain why, but something about his manner felt off. There was no friendliness, no explanation for the stop, just curt questions and long silences. She looked around the road, hoping another car would pass by, but there was nothing. No headlights in the distance. No sound except for the chirping insects and the occasional rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Angela tried to distract herself by checking her phone, but there was no signal out here. She set it back down, exhaling shakily, and muttered softly to herself, "It's fine, Angie. Just stay calm." After a minute, Cole returned again, his boots heavy against the gravel. He leaned slightly against her car window, his flashlight resting on the roof now. "You know," he said slowly, "this isn't really a safe area at night." Angela raised her brows slightly, unsure how to respond. "I didn't know that," she said carefully. "I usually just pass through quickly." He gave a short nod, still staring at her as though waiting for more explanation. The silence stretched again, thick and uncomfortable. Angela cleared her throat. "Officer, is there something wrong with my car? Or, did I break any rule?" Cole's lips pressed into a thin line, and for the first time, she thought she saw the faintest smirk. "No rule," he said simply. "Just checking." She nodded, though his answer didn't settle her nerves. Something about his tone carried a weight she couldn't quite read. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then Cole stepped back, his boots grinding against the gravel, and walked toward his vehicle again. Angela leaned back in her seat, trying to steady her breathing. The gospel song that had been playing earlier still echoed faintly in her head, but the peace it once gave her was gone. Instead, her mind raced with questions. Why had he pulled her over if there was no violation? Why was he lingering instead of finishing the stop? And why did she feel like something else was about to happen? The road remained empty and silent, the shadows of the trees stretching long and dark beneath the faint moonlight. Angela's hand rested over her phone, wishing for signal bars that weren't there. She could only wait, hoping this was just an unusual but harmless stop. But deep inside, a quiet uneasiness whispered that this night was far from ordinary.